Nasir Saif al-Dawla from the novel Natasha and Her Illegitimate Child in a Muslim Society by Dr. A. Ahmed. Siham's character arc, from innocence to tragedy. 1. Introduction and background. Siham is introduced as a beautiful, young Sudanese woman who is the cousin of Hassan Yasser Saif al-Dawla. Her life is shaped by the expectations and restrictions of a conservative Muslim society. She is in love with her neighbor, Hisham, and wishes to marry him, but her father arranges her marriage to her cousin Hassan, who is a doctor working in Saudi Arabia. This marriage is not based on love, but on family arrangement and social expectations. 2. Forced marriage and emotional conflict. Despite her deep feelings for Hisham, Siham is compelled to marry Hassan. She manages to hide her love affair from her new husband during their brief time together in Sudan. After the wedding, Hassan returns to Saudi Arabia and arranges for Siham to join him. The marriage is never emotionally fulfilling for Siham, as her heart remains with her true love, Hisham. 3. Secret love affair in exile. Once in Saudi Arabia, Siham resumes her secret relationship with Hisham, who moves to Riyadh to be near her. Their love, which was innocent and unconsummated in Sudan, becomes physical in Saudi Arabia. Siham and Hisham meet in secret, and she risks everything to be with him. The affair is a source of happiness for Siham, but also places her in grave danger, given the severe consequences for adultery in Saudi law. 4. Discovery and catastrophe. Siham's affair does not remain hidden. Neighbors become suspicious, and eventually, the police are informed. Siham and Hisham are caught together in her apartment, arrested, and subjected to harsh interrogation. Siham is beaten and raped by the police during her detention. Both lovers confess under duress. 5. Trial and punishment. The Sharia court convicts Siham of adultery. As a married woman, she is sentenced to death by stoning, while Hisham, as an unmarried man, receives a sentence of 100 lashes. The punishment is carried out publicly, and Siham's execution is described in graphic, harrowing detail. She is buried up to her neck in hot sand and stoned to death, her beauty destroyed, and her suffering witnessed by a crowd that shows no empathy. 6. Symbolism and legacy. Siham's tragic fate is not just a personal downfall, but a powerful symbol of the dangers faced by women who defy patriarchal and religious norms. Her story exposes the brutality of honor-based violence, the lack of agency for women in marriage, and the lethal consequences of seeking love and autonomy in a repressive society. Her death leaves a profound impact on those who witness it, especially on Hassan, her husband, who is left with guilt and doubt about the justice of such laws, and on Natasha, who is further motivated to expose and challenge the misogynistic practices she encounters. Summary table. Siham's character arc. Stage key events and emotions. Innocence and love, secret romance with Hisham, dreams of marrying for love. Forced marriage, arranged marriage to Hassan, emotional conflict and resignation. Secret affair, resumes relationship with Hisham in Saudi Arabia, experiences love and fear. Discovery and arrest, affair exposed, arrested, beaten, raped, and forced to confess. Trial and execution, convicted of adultery, stoned to death in a public spectacle. Symbolic legacy, becomes a symbol of the oppression and dangers faced by women in patriarchal society. Key themes in Siham's arc. Lack of agency. Siham's life choices are dictated by her family and society. Love versus duty. Her heart's desires are crushed by social and religious obligations. Tragedy of patriarchy. Her fate illustrates the lethal consequences of patriarchal control. Victim of double standards. While men's infidelities are often overlooked, women like Siham pay with their lives. Catalyst for change. Her story fuels the activism and outrage of characters like Natasha. How Siham's fate influences Natasha's character in Natasha and Her Illegitimate Child in a Muslim Society by Dr. A. Ahmed. How Siham's fate shapes Natasha's character. 1. Catalyst for moral outrage and activism. Saham's tragic end, being stoned to death for adultery after her secret love affair is discovered, serves as a powerful catalyst for Natasha's transformation from a researcher and observer into a passionate activist. Witnessing the brutality and injustice of Saham's execution, Natasha is overwhelmed by horror, grief, and anger. This event crystallizes her understanding of the lethal consequences of patriarchal and religious laws for women, especially those who dare to seek love or autonomy. The trauma of Saham's death intensifies Natasha's sense of moral responsibility to expose and challenge these abuses, fueling her determination to fight for women's rights and dignity. 2. Deepening empathy and personal connection. Natasha's empathy for Saham is profound. She sees in Saham's suffering a reflection of her own vulnerabilities and the dangers faced by all women in similar societies. Saham's fate is not just a distant tragedy, it is personal for Natasha, who has herself been subjected to violence, stigma, and the threat of death for transgressing social norms. This deep identification with Saham's pain strengthens Natasha's resolve to bear witness, to document these stories, and to give voice to the silence. 2. 3. Fuel for academic and public advocacy. After Saham's execution, Natasha channels her grief and outrage into her academic work and public advocacy. She documents the details of Saham's case, using it as a central example in her research, speeches, and writings. Saham's story becomes emblematic of the broader system of gender oppression Natasha seeks to dismantle. The vividness and brutality of Saham's fate give Natasha's arguments urgency and emotional power, helping her to persuade others of the need for reform. 4. Strengthening resolve against backlash. The community's reaction to Saham's death, ranging from indifference to celebration, deepens Natasha's awareness of the cultural and institutional barriers to change. She realizes that challenging such entrenched norms will provoke hostility, denial, and even violence. Rather than deterring her, this backlash strengthens Natasha's resolve. Saham's fate becomes a warning of what happens when silence and complicity prevail, and Natasha is determined not to be silenced herself. 5. Shaping Natasha's legacy and mission. Ultimately, Saham's fate becomes a defining moment in Natasha's journey. It marks the point at which Natasha moves beyond personal survival to embrace a mission of advocacy and reform. Saham's story is woven into Natasha's legacy as a scholar, activist, and survivor. Natasha's later work, her books, public speeches, and international advocacy are all shaped by the memory of Saham and the imperative to prevent such tragedies from recurring. Key evidence from the novel. Natasha witnesses Saham's stoning from her apartment window, videotapes the event, and is emotionally devastated by the brutality and the community's lack of empathy. The trauma of Saham's death motivates Natasha to speak out more forcefully, even at great personal risk. Natasha uses Saham's story as a central example in her academic dissertation and public advocacy, arguing that such punishments are not isolated incidents, but systemic abuses rooted in law and tradition. The backlash Natasha faces after publicizing Saham's fate, including threats, ostracism, and legal challenges, mirrors the dangers Saham faced, reinforcing Natasha's commitment to her cause. Summary table. Saham's influence on Natasha. Aspect of Natasha's character influence of Saham's fate. Moral outrage fuels Natasha's activism and sense of duty to expose injustice. Empathy deepens Natasha's personal connection to victims of gender violence. Academic advocacy provides a vivid, real-life case for Natasha's research and arguments. Resilience strengthens Natasha's resolve in the face of backlash and threats. Legacy Saham's story becomes central to Natasha's mission and public impact. In summary, Saham's fate is a turning point for Natasha, transforming her from a witness to an unyielding advocate for women's rights. The horror and injustice of Saham's execution galvanize Natasha's activism, deepen her empathy, and shape her legacy as a voice for the voiceless. Impact of Saham's fate on other characters. 1. Hassan Yasser Saif al-Dawla, Saham's husband. Guilt and self-reflection. Hassan is deeply affected by Saham's execution. He is left with overwhelming guilt, questioning his own role in her fate and the justice of the laws that condemned her. The tragedy forces him to reflect on the nature of arranged marriage, the lack of love in their union, and the cruelty of the system that punishes women so harshly for seeking happiness. Loss of faith and identity crisis. Witnessing Siham's stoning and the community's reaction leads Hassan to doubt the fairness of religious and social norms. He begins to question the foundations of his faith and the legitimacy of the patriarchal order, which ultimately contributes to his own personal crisis and alienation. 2. Hisham, Siham's lover. Physical and emotional trauma. Hisham, who is flogged and left handicapped for life, is devastated by Siham's death. The loss of his beloved and the brutality of his punishment leave him emotionally shattered and physically disabled, symbolizing the destruction wrought by the enforcement of rigid moral codes. Symbol of lost love, Hisham's suffering serves as a stark reminder of the cost of forbidden love in a society that values honor over individual happiness. 3. The community and neighbors. Reinforcement of patriarchal norms. The community's reaction, ranging from indifference to celebration, reinforces the culture of shame and honor. Many neighbors see Siham's execution as justified, further entrenching the social order that oppresses women. Desensitization and complicity. The lack of empathy shown by the crowd, including women who ululate and cheer, highlights the normalization of violence against women and the complicity of the broader society in perpetuating such injustices. 4. Natasha, protagonist. Catalyst for activism. Siham's fate profoundly influences Natasha, fueling her outrage and deepening her commitment to fight for women's rights. The trauma of witnessing Siham's execution becomes a turning point in Natasha's journey from observer to activist, as she channels her grief and anger into advocacy, research, and public speaking. Empathy and solidarity. Natasha's empathy for Siham strengthens her resolve to bear witness and give voice to the silenced, making Siham's story central to her mission. 5. Broader symbolism. Warning and inspiration. Siham's fate serves as both a warning and an inspiration to other women in the story. It demonstrates the dangers of defying patriarchal norms, but also highlights the necessity of resistance and the importance of solidarity among women. Summary table. Impact of Siham's fate. Character/group impact of Siham's fate. Hassan, husband, guilt, self-reflection, loss of faith, identity crisis. Hisham, lover, physical/emotional trauma, symbol of lost love. Community/neighbors, reinforcement of patriarchal norms, desensitization, complicity. Natasha, protagonist, catalyst for activism, deepened empathy, resolve to fight for women's rights. Other women, warning about risks, inspiration for resistance, solidarity. In summary, Siham's tragic end reverberates through the lives of those around her, exposing the cruelty of patriarchal systems, catalyzing personal crises, and inspiring activism and resistance among those who witness her suffering. Community's response to Siham's punishment. 1. Public spectacle and participation. Siham's execution by stoning is treated as a public event. The execution ground is crowded with men and children, all dressed in traditional garments, and even male children are brought by their fathers or brothers to witness the punishment. Women and girls watch from balconies, standing together like scary black ghosts, using binoculars to get a better view. The event is not hidden or shameful, but rather a spectacle for the entire community to witness. 2. Lack of empathy and dehumanization. There is a striking absence of empathy for Siham. As she is buried up to her neck and stoned, her screams and pleas for mercy are ignored. The crowd shows no pity. Instead, they are described as hard-hearted, like those terrorists of ISIS who rejoiced in the beheading of their hapless victims. Even after her death, the crowd disperses as if they are discussing a wonderful sport game they have just watched together. Women in the community are seen clapping, ululating, and cheering for the men who carried out the execution, celebrating the act as a fulfillment of religious and social duty. 3. Reinforcement of patriarchal and religious norms. The community's reaction reinforces the patriarchal and religious norms that justify such punishments. Siham's death is seen as a necessary act to cleanse the community of shame and to uphold the honor of the family and society. The lack of dissent or protest and the active participation of both men and women demonstrate how deeply internalized these norms are. The event is used to teach children about the consequences of transgression, further perpetuating the cycle of violence and control. 4. Silencing and warning. The public nature of the punishment serves as a warning to other women and girls in the community. It is a demonstration of the consequences of defying social and religious expectations, effectively silencing dissent and reinforcing conformity through fear. The community's collective response ensures that the lesson is not lost on anyone who might consider similar actions. 5. Social ostracism and stigma. Rather than viewing Siham as a victim, the community treats her as a source of shame and disgrace. Her punishment is not mourned but celebrated, and her suffering is seen as deserved. This reaction reflects the broader culture of shame and honor that governs social relations, particularly for women. Representative quotes from the novel. The crowd dispersed as soon as the dead body had been cleared from the crime scene. While they are leaving, they are conversing with each other as if they are discussing a wonderful sport game they have just watched together. Even their female counterparts have remained standing on their windows, talking and laughing. Some wicked Sudanese women clapped their hands, shouted ululations of joy, and cheered to their men who supposedly have carried out the judgment of the exalted Allah and his holy prophet Muhammad on the so-called evil and dirty bitch who spoiled the bright name of Sudan. Community's response. Aspect description. Public spectacle execution is a community event, attended by men, women, and children. Lack of empathy, no pity for Siham. Her suffering is ignored or celebrated. Reinforcement of norms, punishment seen as necessary to uphold honor and religious law. Silencing and warning serves as a deterrent and warning to other women. Social ostracism and stigma. Siham is treated as a source of shame, not as a victim. In summary, the community's response to Siham's punishment is one of collective participation, dehumanization, and reinforcement of patriarchal and religious norms. Her execution is not only accepted but celebrated, serving as both a warning and a means of social control, and highlighting the deep-rooted culture of shame and violence against women in the society depicted in the novel. Religious leaders play a pivotal role in shaping and legitimizing the community's response to Siham's punishment. Here's an analysis based on the text. Role of religious leaders in the community's response. 1. Legitimizing the punishment. Religious leaders are central in interpreting and enforcing Sharia law, which prescribes stoning for adultery. Their authority gives religious and moral legitimacy to the punishment of Siham. The execution is not seen as a personal vendetta but as the fulfillment of divine law, as interpreted and sanctioned by these leaders. Their presence and pronouncements assure the community that the act is not only legal but righteous. Leading the ritual and public spectacle. During Siham's execution, a religious figure, described as an old man who looked like Iblis the devil, initiates the stoning by shouting Allah Akbar and casting the first stones. This ritualistic leadership sets the tone for the crowd, signaling that the act is a religious duty and encouraging collective participation. The invocation of religious phrases and the structured nature of the punishment reinforce its perceived sanctity and inevitability. 3. Reinforcing patriarchal and religious norms. Religious leaders are depicted as the ultimate arbiters of morality and honor. Their interpretations of scripture and law underpin the community's understanding of right and wrong, especially regarding gender roles and sexual conduct. By upholding and enforcing these norms, they perpetuate the patriarchal order and the culture of shame that justifies violence against women like Siham. 4. Silencing dissent and encouraging complicity. The authority of religious leaders discourages dissent within the community. Their endorsement of the punishment makes it dangerous for anyone to question or protest the act. Instead, Their leadership encourages complicity as community members, men, women, and even children participate in or celebrate the execution, believing it to be divinely sanctioned. 5. Shaping public memory and socialization. By leading such public punishments, religious leaders shape the collective memory and values of the community. The event becomes a lesson for all, especially for women and girls, about the consequences of defying religious and social norms. The involvement of religious figures ensures that the punishment is remembered not as a crime, but as a necessary act of justice and purification. Summary table. Religious leaders' roles. Function description. Legitimizing punishment, interpret and enforce Sharia law, giving divine authority to the execution. Leading ritual initiate and structure the stoning, invoking religious phrases and setting the public tone. Reinforcing norms, uphold patriarchal and religious values, especially regarding women's sexuality. Silencing dissent, discourage protest or questioning, encouraging community complicity. Shaping socialization, use public punishment as a lesson, reinforcing obedience and fear. In summary, religious leaders are not passive observers, but active architects of the community's response to Saham's punishment. Their authority transforms violence into ritual, silences opposition, and ensures that the act is seen as both a religious obligation and a social necessity. Natasha videotapes the stoning of Saham for several important reasons. 1. Bearing witness to injustice. Natasha feels a deep moral responsibility to bear witness to the brutality and injustice of Saham's execution. She understands that such acts are often hidden or denied by authorities and communities, and that documenting the event is a way to ensure the truth cannot be easily erased or ignored. By videotaping the stoning, Natasha is determined to create an undeniable record of what happened. 2. Exposing the reality to the outside world. Natasha's goal is to expose the reality of gender-based violence and the cruelty of religiously sanctioned punishments to a broader, international audience. She believes that showing the world the graphic and harrowing details of Saham's execution will help break the silence around such abuses and challenge the narratives that justify or minimize them. The video is intended as evidence for advocacy, academic work, and media to spark outrage and demand for change. 3. Motivated by grief and outrage. Witnessing the stoning from her apartment window, Natasha is emotionally devastated and filled with grief and outrage. Her decision to videotape the event is driven by a sense of helplessness. She cannot stop the execution, but she can ensure that Saham's suffering is not forgotten or dismissed. The act of recording becomes a form of protest and resistance. 4. Using the video as a tool for activism. Later in the novel, Natasha uses the video as a powerful tool in her activism. She shares it with international media, such as Fox News, and human rights organizations to illustrate the urgent need for reform and to counter denial or apologetic from religious authorities and community leaders. The video becomes central to her campaign to expose and challenge the misogynistic practices she has witnessed. Natasha videotapes the stoning of Saham to document the truth, expose injustice to the world, honor the victim's suffering, and use the evidence as a catalyst for advocacy and change. Her actions reflect her transformation from a passive observer to an active, courageous voice for women's rights. Natasha faces significant risks by videotaping the stoning of Saham. Here's a summary of those risks based on the text. Risks Natasha faces by videotaping the stoning. 1. Legal repercussions. Criminal charges. Videotaping such an event is considered a serious offense in the context of the society depicted in the novel. Natasha risks being accused of espionage, blasphemy, or inciting rebellion against religious and state authorities. In the story, she is later arrested and charged with apostasy, spying, and instigating rebellion, partly due to her documentation and exposure of abuses. Site turn 10fetch_file. 2. Physical danger. Threat of violence or death. By recording and later sharing the video, Natasha puts herself at risk of violent retaliation from authorities, religious leaders, or community members who view her actions as a betrayal or an attack on their honor and faith. The novel describes how those who challenge or expose such practices can become targets for physical harm or even assassination attempts, cite social ostracism and stigma. Community backlash. Natasha's actions lead to her being ostracized, shunned, and vilified by the local community. She is seen as a traitor, an outsider, and a source of shame, which results in social isolation and the loss of any support network within the society. 4. Professional and academic risks. Loss of academic standing. Natasha's documentation and exposure of the stoning put her academic career in jeopardy. She faces institutional complaints, legal challenges, and attempts to discredit her research and professional reputation, both locally and internationally. Cite turn 5. Psychological trauma. Emotional toll. The act of witnessing and recording such brutality, combined with the subsequent backlash and threats, causes Natasha significant psychological distress, including trauma, anxiety, and fear for her safety and that of her loved ones. Cite 6. Threats to family and associates. Collateral risk. By exposing the event, Natasha also puts her family, friends, and associates at risk of retaliation, surveillance, or harm from those seeking to silence her or punish her for her activism. In summary, by videotaping the stoning of Siham, Natasha risks arrest, torture, and even death, faces social and professional ruin, endures psychological trauma, and exposes her loved ones to danger. Her courageous act of documentation is both a form of resistance and a source of immense personal peril in the context of the novel's settings. The love between Siham and Hisham is condemned both legally and socially for several intertwined reasons rooted in the novel's depiction of Sudanese and Saudi society. Legal condemnation. Adultery under Sharia law. Siham is a married woman. Her relationship with Hisham, which becomes physical after her marriage to Hassan, is considered adultery under Islamic, Sharia, law. In both Sudan and Saudi Arabia, adultery is a criminal offense, especially for married women, and is punishable by severe penalties, including flogging and stoning to death. The law does not recognize love or consent as mitigating factors. The mere existence of a sexual or romantic relationship outside marriage is a gendered double standards. The legal system is harsher on women than men. While Hisham is flogged, Siham is sentenced to death by stoning. This reflects the patriarchal legal structure, where women's sexuality is tightly controlled and violations are met with extreme punishment, especially when they are married. Cite social condemnation. Honor and shame culture. In the society depicted, a woman's sexual behavior is directly tied to family and community honor. Siham's affair is seen not as a personal matter, but as a source of shame for her family and the broader community. The community's response is not one of empathy, but of outrage and a desire to restore honor through punishment. Cite patriarchal social norms. Romantic love outside arranged marriage is viewed as rebellion against family and religious authority. Siham's pursuit of her own happiness is interpreted as selfishness and immorality, threatening the social order. The community, including women, participates in her condemnation and punishment, reinforcing these norms. Cite public spectacle and deterrence. The stoning is conducted as a public event, with men, women, and children attending. The spectacle serves as a warning to others, reinforcing the taboo against extramarital relationships and the consequences of defying social and religious expectations. Summary table. Why Siham and Hisham's love is condemned. Aspect reason for condemnation. Legal adultery under Sharia law. Severe penalties, especially for married women. Social scene as a violation of family/community honor. Triggers collective outrage. Gender harsher punishment for women, reflects patriarchal control of female sexuality. Cultural romantic love outside arranged marriage is taboo and seen as rebellion. Public punishment is a public spectacle to deter others and reinforce social norms. In summary, Siham and Hisham's love is condemned because it violates both religious law, adultery, and deeply entrenched social norms about honor, marriage, and gender. The legal system enforces these norms with brutal punishments, while the community participates in shaming and punishing the transgressors to maintain the established order. Here's a comparative analysis of Siham and Hisham's punishments and how these reflect the gender roles in the society. Dr. A. Ahmed. Comparison of punishments. Siham, married woman. Punishment. Siham is sentenced to death by stoning for adultery after being caught in a love affair with Hisham while married to Hassan. Execution. The punishment is carried out publicly and with extreme brutality. Siham is buried up to her neck in hot sand and stoned to death by a crowd, her suffering treated as a spectacle. The community, including women, participates in or celebrates her execution. Severity. The punishment is final, fatal, and intended to serve as a warning to other women. It is rooted in Sharia law, which prescribes stoning for married women found guilty of adultery. Hisham, unmarried man. Punishment. Hisham, as Siham's lover, is sentenced to 100 lashes. Aftermath. He is flogged and left physically handicapped for life, but he survives. His punishment, while severe and life-altering, is not fatal. Severity. The punishment is harsh but less severe than Siham's. It reflects the legal and social double standard for men and women in cases of adultery. Gender roles reflected in the punishments. 1. Legal double standard. Women face harsher penalties. Siham's punishment is far more severe than Hisham's, even though both participated in the affair. This reflects a legal system that polices and punishes female sexuality much more harshly than male sexuality. Men's actions minimized. Hisham's role is acknowledged, but his punishment is survivable, and he is not subjected to the same level of public shaming or fatal violence. 2. Social expectations and honor. Women as bearers of honor. Siham's actions are seen as a direct attack on family and community honor, making her punishment not just a legal matter, but a social necessity in the eyes of the community. Men's transgressions overlooked. While Hisham is punished, the community's outrage and the ritual of stoning are focused on Siham, reinforcing the idea that women are the primary guardians and violators of social and sexual morality. 3. Public spectacle and socialization. Women's punishment as a warning. The public nature of Siham's execution is meant to deter other women from similar behavior, reinforcing their subordinate status and the dangers of defying patriarchal norms. Men's punishment as private. Hisham's flogging, though public, does not carry the same ritualistic or symbolic weight as Siham's stoning. 4. Agency and victimhood. Women as victims of the system. Siham's fate illustrates how women are victimized by both the legal system and the community, with little agency or possibility for defense. Men as survivors. Hisham, though punished, is allowed to survive, and his suffering is not treated with the same level of communal spectacle or moral outrage. Summary table. Siham versus
Hisham.
Aspect. Siham, married woman. Hisham, unmarried man. Legal status: married, unmarried. Crime: adultery. Punishment: death by stoning, 100 lashes, flogging. Outcome: executed, public spectacle, survives, left handicapped. Social response: outrage, public shaming, less focus, less shaming. Ritualized violence: punishment, survivable. Symbolism: warning to all women, male sexuality less policed. Upholding honor, less symbolic. In summary, Siham's and Hisham's punishments starkly reveal the gendered double standards of the society depicted in the novel. Women are held to stricter standards, face harsher penalties, and are made examples of in the name of honor and morality, while men's transgressions, though punished, are treated with less severity and spectacle. Dr. Hassan, Siham's husband, suffers several serious and lasting consequences after her stoning. 1. Overwhelming guilt and self-blame. Hassan is left with deep guilt, questioning his own role in Siham's fate. He reflects on the nature of their arranged marriage, his emotional distance, and whether he could have prevented her tragic end. The brutality of her execution haunts him, and he feels responsible for not recognizing her unhappiness or intervening sooner. 2. Loss of faith and identity crisis. Witnessing the stoning and the community's reaction causes Hassan to doubt the justice and morality of the religious and social system he once accepted. He begins to question the foundations of his faith, the legitimacy of patriarchal laws, and the meaning of honor, leading to a profound personal and spiritual crisis. Social stigma and isolation. After Saham's execution, Hassan becomes stigmatized within his community. He is associated with scandal and shame, both as the husband of an adulteress and as someone whose family honor has been publicly disgraced. This leads to social ostracism and a loss of support from friends and neighbors. 4. Emotional trauma and psychological distress. The trauma of losing his wife in such a violent, public manner leaves Hassan emotionally devastated. He experiences ongoing psychological distress, including depression, anxiety, and recurring thoughts about the injustice of Saham's fate and his own helplessness. 5. Alienation and disconnection. Hassan's doubts and grief create a sense of alienation from his faith, his community, and even himself. He struggles to find meaning or belonging after the loss, and his relationships with others become strained or broken. 6. Catalyst for change. Ultimately, the tragedy becomes a turning point for Hassan. It forces him to confront the realities of gender oppression and the consequences of unquestioned tradition. This crisis may lead him to seek a new path, question authority, or even leave his former beliefs behind. In summary, after Saham's stoning, Dr. Hassan is left with guilt, loss of faith, social stigma, emotional trauma, and a profound sense of alienation. Her fate becomes a catalyst for his personal crisis and transformation, forcing him to confront the injustices of the system he once accepted. Hassan's identity crisis after Saham's death. 1. Shattering of faith and certainty. After witnessing the brutal stoning of his wife Saham, Dr. Hassan is overwhelmed by guilt and horror. The event forces him to confront the reality of the religious and social system he has always accepted. The public execution, justified by Sharia law and celebrated by the community, makes him question the justice and morality of the very faith and traditions he was raised to uphold. He begins to doubt the fairness of religious law, the legitimacy of patriarchal authority, and the meaning of honor and shame in his society. 2. Loss of social belonging. Saham's execution brings shame and stigma upon Hassan. He is ostracized by his community, not only as the husband of an adulteress, but as someone whose family honor has been irreparably damaged. This social exclusion deepens his sense of alienation, as he no longer feels accepted or supported by the people around him. The loss of social belonging is compounded by his growing doubts about the values and beliefs that once defined his identity. 3. Emotional and psychological turmoil. The trauma of losing his wife in such a violent and public manner leaves Hassan emotionally devastated. He is haunted by the brutality of the punishment and his own perceived complicity, having been part of a system that led to Saham's death. This psychological distress manifests as depression, anxiety, and a profound sense of helplessness and regret. 4. Crisis of masculinity and role. Hassan's role as a husband, protector, and upholder of family honor is thrown into crisis. The very system that was supposed to safeguard his honor has instead destroyed his family and left him isolated. He questions what it means to be a man in a society where masculinity is tied to control, punishment, and the suffering of women. This crisis extends to his sense of self-worth and purpose. Turns. 5. Search for meaning and new identity. Ultimately, the tragedy becomes a turning point for Hassan. The collapse of his faith in religious and social norms pushes him to seek new meaning and identity. He is forced to reconsider his beliefs, his place in the world, and the possibility of change. This may lead him to reject the old order, embrace new values, or even become an advocate for reform, though the novel also shows the immense difficulty and pain involved in such a transformation. Summary table. Stages of Hassan's identity crisis. Stage description. Shattering of faith, doubts, justice of religious law and patriarchal authority. Loss of belonging, ostracized and stigmatized by community. Emotional turmoil, experiences guilt, trauma, depression, and regret. Crisis of masculinity, questions his role as husband and man in a patriarchal society. Search for meaning, begins to seek new values, beliefs, and a sense of self. In summary, Dr. Hassan's identity crisis after Saham's death is marked by the collapse of his faith in religious and social norms, deep emotional trauma, loss of social belonging, and a painful search for new meaning. The tragedy forces him to confront the injustices of the system he once accepted and to question his own role within it, leading to profound personal transformation and alienation. Dr. Hassan's identity crisis after Saham's death has profound effects on his relationships with others. 1. Relationship with himself. Hassan's sense of self is shattered. He is plagued by guilt, shame, and doubt about his role as a husband and as a man in a patriarchal society. He questions the values and beliefs he once held, leading to depression and a loss of direction. 2. Relationship with the community. Hassan becomes socially isolated. The community, which once might have respected him, now stigmatizes him as the husband of an adulteress. He is associated with scandal and dishonor, leading to ostracism and a breakdown of social support. His doubts about religious and social norms further alienate him from those around him. 3. Relationship with faith and tradition. Hassan's crisis causes a rupture with his religious identity. He begins to question the justice of Sharia law and the legitimacy of the traditions he was raised with. This spiritual alienation leaves him feeling rootless and disconnected from the faith community that once gave his life structure. 4. Relationship with women and future partners. The trauma and guilt from Saham's fate affect Hassan's ability to trust and connect with women. He may become emotionally withdrawn, fearful of repeating past mistakes, or overly cautious in future relationships. His crisis also makes him more aware of the vulnerabilities and injustices women face, potentially changing how he relates to them. 5. Relationship with Natasha and other allies. Hassan's crisis brings him closer to Natasha, who empathizes with his pain and shares his outrage at the injustice. However, his emotional turmoil and loss of faith can also create tension, as he struggles to articulate his feelings or accept support. Natasha's activism and resilience may inspire him, but his own sense of failure and alienation can make it difficult for him to fully engage or heal. 6. Relationship with family. If Hassan has surviving family members, his crisis may strain those bonds. Family members may blame him for the scandal, or he may feel unable to confide in them due to shame and fear of judgment. The loss of Saham and the ensuing crisis can lead to a sense of familial fragmentation and loneliness. In summary, Hassan's identity crisis after Saham's death leads to self-doubt, social isolation, spiritual alienation, and strained or transformed relationships with women, allies, and family. His journey reflects the deep personal costs of living within, and then questioning the oppressive systems that destroyed his wife and upended his own sense of self. Natasha plays a crucial support role for Dr. Hassan after the traumatic stoning of his wife, Saham. Here's how Natasha's support manifests and why it is significant. 1. Emotional support and empathy. Natasha recognizes the depth of Hassan's guilt, grief, and alienation following Saham's execution. She empathizes with his pain, understanding both the personal loss and the broader crisis of faith and identity he experiences. Natasha listens to Hassan, validates his feelings, and provides a safe space for him to express his doubts and sorrows. 2. Non-judgmental presence. Rather than blaming Hassan for his role in the events leading to Saham's death, Natasha offers compassion and understanding. She does not judge him for his doubts or his emotional turmoil, which helps Hassan begin to process his trauma without additional shame or defensiveness. 3. Encouragement toward healing and change. Natasha encourages Hassan to reflect on the injustices he has witnessed and to consider new perspectives. Her activism and resilience serve as a model for Hassan, showing him that it is possible to channel pain and outrage into meaningful action. She gently challenges him to move beyond guilt and despair and to seek healing and growth. 4. Practical assistance. Beyond emotional support, Natasha helps Hassan navigate the practical challenges that arise from his crisis. This may include helping him find new purpose, supporting him in moments of depression or isolation, and assisting with daily life as he struggles to regain stability. 5. Solidarity and shared mission. Natasha's support is rooted in solidarity. She and Hassan share a commitment to exposing and challenging the patriarchal and religious systems that led to Saham's death. Natasha's willingness to stand with Hassan, even when he is stigmatized and isolated, reinforces his sense of worth and belonging, and helps him envision a future beyond his trauma. In summary, Natasha's support for Hassan is multifaceted. She offers empathy, non-judgmental presence, encouragement, practical help, and solidarity. Her role is vital in helping Hassan survive his identity crisis, process his grief, and begin to imagine a new path forward after the tragedy of Saham's death. Natasha undergoes a profound personal transformation after witnessing the brutal stoning of Saham. This event becomes a pivotal turning point in her character arc, shaping her identity, purpose, and activism in several key ways. 1. From observer to activist. Before Saham's death, Natasha is primarily a researcher and an outsider, an academic documenting the lives of women in a patriarchal society. Witnessing the public execution of Saham, however, shocks her out of detachment. The horror, grief, and outrage she feels propel her from passive observation to active resistance. She becomes determined to expose the injustices she has witnessed, using her voice and platform to advocate for women's rights and challenge oppressive systems. 2. Deepening empathy and moral resolve. Saham's suffering and the community's lack of empathy deepen Natasha's sense of solidarity with oppressed women. She internalizes the pain and fear experienced by Saham and others, which strengthens her moral resolve. Natasha's empathy is no longer abstract or academic. It is personal, urgent, and transformative. She feels a duty to bear witness and to ensure that Saham's story, and those like hers, are not forgotten or dismissed. 3. Willingness to take risks. After Saham's death, Natasha becomes more willing to take personal risks for the sake of truth and justice. She videotapes the stoning, fully aware of the dangers this poses to her safety, reputation, and freedom. Her activism becomes bolder and more public, even as she faces threats, legal persecution, and social ostracism. The trauma of Saham's fate steels Natasha's courage and commitment. 4. Transformation of purpose and identity. The event catalyzes a shift in Natasha's sense of purpose. She moves beyond academic goals to embrace a mission of advocacy and reform. Saham's death becomes a symbol and a rallying point for Natasha's work, shaping her legacy as a voice for the voiceless and a champion for change. Her identity evolves from that of a marginalized outsider to a resilient leader and activist. 5. Impact on relationships and legacy. Natasha's transformation also affects her relationships. She becomes a source of inspiration and support for others who are suffering or questioning the status quo. Her willingness to speak out, even at great personal cost, empowers others to resist and seek justice. Saham's fate, and Natasha's response to it, ripple outward, fueling broader movements for women's rights and social change. In summary, after Saham's death, Natasha is transformed from a passive observer into a courageous activist. Her empathy deepens, her resolve hardens, and her willingness to risk everything for justice defines her new identity. Saham's fate becomes the catalyst for Natasha's lifelong mission to expose, resist, and reform the systems that perpetuate violence and oppression against women. The reactions of Sudanese men and women on the day of Saham's stoning are depicted with vivid detail and serve as a powerful commentary on the social and cultural environment. Sudanese men's reactions. Active participation. Sudanese men, including both adults and children, gather in large numbers at the execution ground. They are described as dressed in white garments, with somber and angry faces, and even bring their young sons to witness the event. The men form a half-circle around Siham, and one religious figure initiates the stoning by shouting Allah Akbar and casting the first stones. Lack of empathy. The men show no pity or compassion for Siham. Instead, they are described as hard-hearted, likened to monsters and worshippers of Lucifer, and compared to terrorists who rejoice in violence. Their participation is ritualistic and communal, reinforcing the idea that the act is a religious and social duty. Normalization of violence. After the stoning, the men disperse, conversing as if they had just watched a sporting event, showing no sign of remorse or discomfort. The event is treated as a normal, even routine, occurrence in their society. Sudanese women's reactions. Spectatorship and celebration. Sudanese women, dressed in black burqas, gather on balconies and windows to watch the stoning. They use binoculars to get a better view and stand together like scary black ghosts. Their presence is not passive. Some women clap, ululate, and cheer for the men who carry out the execution. Complicity and internalization. Rather than expressing sympathy for Siham, many women celebrate her punishment, seeing it as a fulfillment of religious and social expectations. Their reactions reflect the internalization of patriarchal norms and the culture of shame, where punishing a woman for adultery is seen as restoring honor. Teaching by example. The participation of women and the presence of young girls at the event serve as a warning and lesson, reinforcing the dangers of defying social and religious norms for all women and girls in the community site. Representative quotes from the novel. The crowd dispersed as soon as the dead body had been cleared from the crime scene. While they are leaving, they are conversing with each other as if they are discussing a wonderful sport game they have just watched together. Even their female counterparts have remained standing on their windows, talking and laughing. Some wicked Sudanese women clapped their hands, shouted ululations of joy, and cheered to their men who supposedly have carried out the judgment of the exalted Allah and his holy prophet Muhammad on the so-called evil and dirty bitch who spoiled the bright name of Sudan. Summary table. Gendered reactions. Group reaction type description. Sudanese men active participation initiate and carry out stoning, show no empathy, treat event as routine. Sudanese women spectatorship, cheer watch from windows, clap, ululate, celebrate, reinforce social norms. Children's socialization brought by parents to witness, learn consequences of defying norms. In summary, on the day of Siham's stoning, Sudanese men actively participate in and normalize the violence, while Sudanese women, rather than expressing solidarity, often celebrate and reinforce the punishment. Both groups' reactions reflect the deep internalization of patriarchal, religious, and honor-based values in the community site. The psychological impact on Sudanese women witnessing the stoning of Siham is complex and deeply troubling. The text provides both direct and indirect insights into how such a public execution affects women in the community. 1. Internalization of fear and control. Witnessing the stoning serves as a powerful warning. Women and girls see firsthand the lethal consequences of defying social and religious norms, especially regarding sexuality and autonomy. This spectacle instills deep fear, reinforcing their sense of vulnerability and the need for strict self-control to avoid similar punishment. 2. Reinforcement of shame and silence. The event perpetuates a culture of shame. Women are taught that any deviation from prescribed behavior brings disgrace, not only on themselves, but on their families and communities. The public nature of the punishment, and the community's celebration of it, intensifies feelings of shame and the imperative to remain silent about suffering or injustice. 3. Emotional numbing and complicity. Some women respond with emotional detachment or even celebration. The novel describes women clapping, ululating, and cheering during the stoning. This reaction can be seen as a psychological defense mechanism, numbing themselves to the horror by aligning with the dominant values, or as a way to demonstrate loyalty to the community and avoid suspicion themselves. Over time, repeated exposure to such violence can lead to desensitization and internalized complicity. 4. Trauma and anxiety. For more sensitive or critically minded women, the event is traumatizing. Even if not openly expressed, witnessing such brutality can cause lasting psychological distress, anxiety, nightmares, and a pervasive sense of insecurity. The knowledge that their safety depends on absolute conformity creates chronic stress and emotional suppression. 5. Suppression of empathy and solidarity. The spectacle undermines female solidarity. Instead of fostering empathy for the victim, the communal nature of the punishment pressures women to distance themselves from the condemned, sometimes even participating in her shaming. This dynamic weakens bonds of trust and support among women, increasing isolation and psychological vulnerability. Representative passage from the novel. Even their female counterparts have remained standing on their windows, talking and laughing. Some wicked Sudanese women clapped their hands, shouted ululations of joy, and cheered to their men who supposedly have carried out the judgment of the exalted Allah and his holy prophet Muhammad on the so-called evil and dirty bitch who spoiled the bright name of Sudan. Summary table. Psychological impact on Sudanese women. Impact type description. Fear and control deepens fear of punishment, reinforces need for conformity. Shame and silence intensifies internalized shame, discourages speaking out. Emotional numbing leads to detachment, celebration as defense mechanism. Trauma and anxiety causes distress, insecurity, and chronic psychological stress. Suppression of solidarity undermines empathy and trust among women, increases isolation. In summary, witnessing the stoning of Siham leaves Sudanese women with a legacy of fear, shame, trauma, and emotional suppression. The event is designed not only to punish the individual, but to psychologically control and silence all women in the community, ensuring the perpetuation of patriarchal norms and the culture of violence. The public stoning of Siham has a devastating impact on women's solidarity and the fabric of community bonds among Sudanese women. 1. Erosion of female solidarity. Public participation in punishment. Instead of expressing empathy or outrage, many Sudanese women are depicted as active spectators, clapping, ululating, and cheering during the stoning. This public celebration of violence against another woman signals a breakdown in empathy and mutual support. Internalization of patriarchal norms. The women's reactions reflect deep internalization of patriarchal and religious values. By aligning themselves with the punishment, they distance themselves from the victim, hoping to avoid suspicion or stigma. This dynamic discourages women from supporting each other, as solidarity with the condemned could bring shame or danger upon themselves. Suppression of dissent. The communal spectacle and the expectation of public approval for the punishment silence dissenting voices. Women who might feel horror or sympathy are pressured to conform outwardly, further isolating those who suffer or question the system. Turns 7. Fetch reinforcement of isolation and distrust. Fear as a tool of control. Witnessing the brutal consequences of nonconformity instills fear in women, making them less likely to trust or confide in each other about personal struggles or doubts. The risk of being associated with a shameful woman like Siham discourages the formation of supportive bonds. Breakdown of community trust. The event teaches women that the community, including other women, will not protect them if they are accused or fall out of line. This erodes trust and fosters a climate of suspicion and self-preservation rather than collective care. Turns 7. Fetch _file. 3. Perpetuation of the status quo. Normalization of violence. The communal participation and celebration of the stoning normalize violence against women as a legitimate means of enforcing social order. This discourages women from challenging the system or supporting each other in resistance. Loss of safe spaces. The spectacle of punishment in public, with women and girls present, signals that there are no safe spaces for dissent or solidarity. Even private empathy is dangerous, as the community expects visible support for the punishment. Summary table. Impact of stoning on women's solidarity and community bonds. Impact type description. Erosion of solidarity. Women celebrate or accept violence against other women, undermining mutual support. Suppression of dissent. Fear and public conformity. Silence, empathy, and protest. Reinforcement of isolation. Women become more isolated, distrustful, and fearful of association with the condemned. Perpetuation of status quo. Violence is normalized, discouraging resistance or collective action. Loss of safe spaces. No environment is safe for expressing empathy or solidarity. In summary, the stoning of Siham destroys the potential for women's solidarity by turning women into enforcers and spectators of patriarchal violence. It replaces trust and mutual support with fear, conformity, and isolation, ensuring the continued dominance of oppressive norms and the fragmentation of community bonds among women. Natasha's camera plays a crucial role in documenting the stoning of Siham, capturing both the brutality of the event and the reactions of the community. Here's how the novel describes Natasha's act of recording and what her camera captures. Natasha's perspective and preparation. Natasha witnesses the stoning from the window of her apartment, which overlooks the execution ground. She brings with her a very sharp and powerful camera capable of shooting events from a great distance, allowing her to record the stoning as if she were standing nearby. Her motivation is to bear witness, create an undeniable record, and later expose the reality of such punishments to the outside world. Site turns 7fetch_file. The camera records the large crowd of men and children, all dressed in white, with somber and angry faces. Even male children are present, brought by their fathers or brothers. The men form a half-circle around Siham, and the atmosphere is described as monstrous and ritualistic. Siham's ordeal. The camera captures Siham being dragged from a police car, handcuffed and chained, then buried up to her neck in the hot sand. Her face is uncovered, revealing her beauty and terror as she screams and pleads for mercy. The stoning. Natasha's camera documents the beginning of the stoning, initiated by a religious figure who shouts Allah Akbar and throws the first stones. The crowd follows, pelting Siham with stones from all directions. The camera records the blood, the injuries, and the gradual silencing of Siham's screams as she is killed. Community reaction. The camera also captures the reactions of the crowd, men and children participating, women watching from balconies and windows, some clapping, ululating, and cheering. After the execution, the crowd disperses, conversing as if they had just watched a sporting event, with no sign of remorse or empathy. Aftermath. The camera records the removal of the stones and the disfigured, bloodied face of Siham, as well as the dragging away of her body. The event is shown as a public spectacle, with the community treating it as a normal, even celebratory, significance of the recording. Natasha's camera does not just record the violence, it captures the collective complicity, the normalization of brutality, and the absence of empathy in the community. The footage becomes a powerful tool for Natasha's later activism, serving as undeniable evidence of the cruelty and injustice of such punishments. Site turns 7fetch_file. In summary, Natasha's camera captures the stoning of Siham in vivid, harrowing detail, from the gathering of the crowd and the ritualistic violence to the community's chilling celebration and indifference. The recording serves as both a witness to the event and a catalyst for Natasha's transformation into an activist determined to expose and challenge such abuses. While filming the stoning of Siham in Natasha and Her Illegitimate Child in a Muslim Society by Dr. A. Ahmed, Natasha experiences a profound and overwhelming mix of emotions. 1. Horror and shock. Natasha is deeply horrified by the brutality and public spectacle of the stoning. The violence, the suffering of Siham, and the community's lack of empathy leave her shaken and appalled. She is unable to look away, compelled to document the event even as it fills her with dread. Sight turns grief and helplessness. As she witnesses Siham's pain and eventual death, Natasha is overcome with grief. She feels powerless to intervene or stop the execution, and this helplessness intensifies her sorrow. The act of filming becomes both a burden and a duty, her only way to honor Saham's suffering and ensure it is not erased or denied sight. 3. Outrage and moral resolve. Natasha's outrage grows as she observes not only the violence, but also the community's reaction, men participating, women cheering, and children watching. The normalization and celebration of such cruelty ignite a sense of moral urgency in Natasha. She is determined to use the footage as evidence to expose the injustice and challenge the systems that allow such acts to occur. 4. Trauma and emotional numbness. The experience is traumatizing for Natasha. The act of recording forces her to confront the full reality of the event, and she is left emotionally scarred. At times, she feels numb, as if the horror is too great to process in the moment, but the trauma lingers and shapes her actions and activism afterwards. In summary, while filming, Natasha is horrified, grief-stricken, and outraged, yet also feels a deep sense of responsibility. The emotional toll is immense, but the experience galvanizes her transformation from observer to activist, fueling her commitment to expose and fight against such injustice. Physical state of Siham during the stoning. Preparation and exposure. Siham is dragged from a police car, handcuffed and chained, then buried up to her neck in the hot sand. The heat is intense, 48 degrees Celsius, causing her body to suffer severe burns even before the stoning begins. She is dressed in a black abaya and niqab, which are torn away to expose her face to the crowd. Sight turns and injury. As the stoning starts, Siham is struck repeatedly by stones thrown from all directions. The blows cause blood to gush from her face and head, her teeth are broken, her nose is flattened, and her eyes bulge from their sockets. The pain is described as unbearable, like hundreds of sharp long nails being hammered into her head. Her head is eventually broken, her mouth is left toothless, and her face is disfigured beyond recognition. Physical collapse. Siham's body is battered and immobilized, her screaming and groaning eventually silenced by the severity of her injuries. She is left lifeless, her head slumped backward, and her body is ultimately dragged away after the stoning ends. Mental state of Siham during the stoning. Terror and desperation. Siham is terrified and pleads for mercy, screaming and calling for help as she is buried and the stoning begins. She calls upon Allah and the Prophet Muhammad to save her, but her pleas are ignored by both the authorities and the crowd. Sight turns overwhelming fear, the realization that no one will help her, and that the community, including women and children, are present to witness and celebrate her execution, adds to her psychological torment. She is acutely aware of her isolation and the inevitability of her fate. Humiliation and dehumanization. Being stripped of her clothing, exposed to the crowd, and subjected to public violence is deeply humiliating. The lack of empathy from the crowd, who treat her suffering as a spectacle, compounds her sense of dehumanization and despair. Final moments. As the pain and injuries overwhelm her, Siham's mental state likely shifts from terror to numbness and shock before she loses consciousness and dies. Her suffering is prolonged and public, intended as both punishment and warning. Representative passage from the novel. She is handcuffed and her legs are securely fastened by chains. There is already a hole that has been dug for her burial. Then the Arab policeman forcibly inserted her resisting body inside that hole. Some men came and buried her until her neck. Only her neck and head are visible while the rest of her body is completely buried underground. It is 48 degrees Celsius when the poor Siham has been buried up to her neck in the hot sand of the Sahara Desert. The heat of the sun and the hot sand have scorched her body, causing 75% second-degree burns to her flesh, and she is screaming louder and louder. After that, her face is uncovered so that everyone could see her. She is also expected to see those people who have gathered around her to stone her to death. Then those policemen have forcefully tore the black niqab from her face. They are like two wolves tearing out the flesh of an innocent lamb. In the meantime, the condemned girl Siham continued to scream and call for help. She even called upon the names of Allah and her Prophet Muhammad to come and rescue her from that cruel and painful death. But neither Allah come from his black house in Makkah city, nor did her Prophet Muhammad have resurrected from his grave in Medina city. No one among her executioners and her Sudanese people has shown pity towards her. The stones started to hit her from all directions, and the blood gushed out of her face and head like a liquid of red acid. Her screaming and groaning have stopped and can no longer be heard due to the shouting of the Muslim of Allah in unison, Allah Akbar, Allah Akbar. The crowd dispersed as soon as the dead body had been cleared from the crime scene. In summary, Siham's physical state during the stoning is one of extreme pain, injury, and eventual death, while her mental state is marked by terror, humiliation, isolation, and despair. The novel's graphic depiction underscores both the brutality of the punishment and the psychological torment inflicted on the victim's sight. The stoning scene of Siham is rich with key themes that reflect the novel's broader critique of gender, power, and society. Here is a summary of the central themes. Key themes from Siham's stoning scene. 1. Patriarchal violence and gender oppression. The stoning is a stark illustration of how patriarchal systems use extreme violence to control and punish women's sexuality and autonomy. Siham's fate is determined by laws and customs that value family and community honor over her life and dignity. 2. Public spectacle and social control. The execution is a public event, witnessed and participated in by men, women, and children. This spectacle serves as a warning to others, reinforcing conformity and obedience through fear. The normalization of such violence is a tool for maintaining social order. 3. Dehumanization and loss of empathy. Siham is stripped of her humanity, treated as an object of shame and punishment. The community's lack of empathy, celebrating, ululating, and treating the stoning as entertainment underscores the dehumanization of women who transgress social norms. 4. Culture of shame and honor. The scene exposes how the culture of shame and honor justifies violence against women. Siham's punishment is seen as necessary to cleanse the community and restore its reputation, highlighting the destructive power of collective shame. 5. Suppression of female solidarity. Instead of solidarity, women in the community participate in or celebrate the violence, reflecting internalized patriarchy and the breakdown of empathy among women. This dynamic reinforces isolation and discourages resistance. 6. Psychological trauma and fear. The stoning instills deep psychological trauma and fear in all who witness it, especially women and girls. It is a lesson in the consequences of nonconformity, ensuring silence and submission through terror. 7. Resistance and bearing witness. Through Natasha's act of filming, the scene also introduces the theme of resistance. Natasha's determination to document and expose the brutality becomes an act of defiance and a catalyst for her activism. In summary, Siham's stoning scene encapsulates themes of patriarchal violence, public spectacle, dehumanization, the culture of shame, suppression of solidarity, psychological trauma, and the beginnings of resistance. It is a powerful indictment of systems that perpetuate gender-based violence and silence dissent.